For this video, I want to introduce the list class, which manages a list of units. And to make it more practical, I'll be looking at the memo for Practical 2. So it would probably be best if you have the memo for Practical 2 available. An important aspect which I'm trying to emphasize making use of classes is the fact that when we write a program, we kind of simulate the real world, and we're using programming principles to implement that simulation. So for this for example, we're simulating a list of bank accounts. So class bank account list is a simulation of what you would do in the real world with a list of bank accounts. How do we implement this list? We implement it by using an array of bank accounts. So if you look on the code on the screen, class bank account list is a simulation, but hidden inside that class is a normal array of bank accounts with a number of elements and size. When you're working with a list class, there's continuously an interaction between the list class and the application class that uses the list class. So the public methods in the list class will often be called by the application class. So we start off with the constructor of a bank account list on the left hand side at the bottom. You'll see it's a public method. It initializes the array, allocates memory for it, and it sets number of elements to 0. How is this used in the application class? When you initialize the object list, which is an instantiation of bank account list, in that declaration you call the constructor bank account list, which does the original initialization. A method that you will always have in a list class is the display method. Look at the bottom left. What does this display method do? It has a for loop that traverses the array from 0 to number of elements minus 1. It fetches the specific object at position X, which we have current pointed to, and then you just say current.display. Now that current.display uses the display method in the original bank account class. So note here we have 3 display methods here. The one we're looking at in the bottom left is the method in the list class that traverses the array. For each element in the array, it calls current.display, which is the method inside bank account, each separate bank account. On the application class, we now created a method called display. It takes as input the list. So it simply says display this list. How do we do that? Inside this method, we say list.display. So how do we display this list? We call the method display inside list, which is then calls the one on the bottom left. Again, on the bottom left is your add method that's used to add something to the list. It takes in the name and the PIN of a bank account and uses that to add it. So after it takes in name and PIN, it creates a new object called new one as an instantiation of class bank account. It has the pointer at position number of element point to this object, and then it increases number of elements. In the application class, where the user interacts with it, you also have an add bank account method, but it first talks to the user. It finds out the name of this bank account, it gets a valid PIN, and then once it has the name and the PIN, it calls list.add. So it then calls the add method inside the list class. Before we continue with the other methods that I want to discuss, first this whole issue of numbering the elements in a list. By now you will all know that an array, like we did in the first semester, simply goes from 0 to number of elements minus 1. So the first element is at position 0, then 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. But remember we said that the list class must simulate a real world list. So for a real world list, we want to say a list starts at position 1. Okay, so when we traverse the list in the application class, like at the bottom, we want a for loop that says X starts at 1 and x goes up to list.count. Notice what is list.count, bottom top right. List.count simply just returns the number of elements in the array inside the list. But at the top you'll see if you traverse the array inside the list class, your for loop starts at 0, because then you're working with the actual array and not with a simulation of a list. In the next slides we'll see what impact this has on the coding. Okay, the first method we're looking at is the method called find. Bottom left. The find method is in the list class. What we send through is something that we're looking for in the list. In this case, wanted will be a name of a bank account. You'll remember that we use linear search as discussed in the first semester. What does linear search do? It returns the position where you found wanted in the array. So if you found it in the first position, it would return a 0. If you find it in the third position, it would return a 2, because the array starts at position 0. But in the application class, we think the list starts at position 1. So if linear search says something is at position 0, the application class wants to see it being at position 1. So the find method returns linear search plus 1, just to get in sync with the simulation on the outside. Notice if linear search does not find something, it returns a -1, and therefore find will return a 0 if not found. So if you go to the top right hand corner, the withdraw method asks for the name of a bank account, and then it needs to find that bank account, so it calls list.find. The pos that is returned is the position in the list starting at position 1. So once the find returns, it will tell us where it is in the list, as if the list starts at position 1. Notice we say if pos is not equal to 0, because we said if the linear search finds something, it returns a -1, therefore the find will return a 0. So let's go further with the application class withdraw method. It has now found, let's say, the bank account at position 3 in the list, and then asks for the amount to withdraw, and then it calls list.get. So if it thinks if it sees it to being at position 3, the pos that goes through to the bottom left has the value 3. First of all, there's just an if statement there that checks whether it's a valid position, and a valid position would be from 1 to number of elements. Remember, pos comes through thinking the list starts at 1. But to return the object that it wants, it needs to say pos -1. So repeat from the previous slide. So if the application class thinks something is at position 3, it will actually be at position 2 in the array. Therefore it returns the thing at position pos -1. The return null is simply when you get an invalid position. It just returns a null pointer or a dangling pointer indicating that it did not find anything.